Good afternoon, everyone. As Isabel said, my name is Herbert Reed, and I'm a veteran of the Vietnam War and the present war in Iraq, Iraqi War for Freedom. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm here to tell you how I came to be contaminated and when I found out about depleted uranium. Around January of 2003, my unit, the 442 Military Police Company, was activated to go to Iraq to serve in the war, to serve with the 101st Airborne out of Fort Knox, Kentucky. We were short personnel, so we weren't supposed to be activated until February and then move out to Fort Dix, New Jersey for training in late March and then arrive in Iraq around April. But like I said, we were short personnel, so they activated us a month in advance and kept us at the armory so that no one would desert. After we received our training at Fort Dix in the dead of winter, we were shipped out to Iraq, to Kuwait staging area, and we convoyed in through the southern part of Iraq. At no time during our briefings was depleted uranium ever mentioned to us. There was no mention of how to identify areas that were contaminated already, how to protect ourselves. We were just sent in there not knowing anything. And it was, by 8 o'clock in the morning in Iraq, the temperature would be 130, 140 degrees. You perspired profusely all day, all night. So it was just unbearable. But you got used to it. You drank a lot of water and you dealt with it. The sad part about it is that a lot of soldiers became very dehydrated, and every time you looked around, we were hooked up to IVs. Late May, my left side of my body became partially paralyzed for no unknown reason. The day before, I was perfectly fine, went to bed, woke up in excruciating pain. No one could tell me what was wrong. Went on sick call, and for about 2.5, 3 weeks, I would see a sports therapist who would massage, and then I'd massage my left side, and I would go back out on patrol. It became apparent that the muscles were, dying. So the doctor that was treating me at the time told my commander that I had to be medevaced immediately, or he was going to drive me out of there. During that time, there was a shortage of soldiers in Iraq, and commanders were reluctant to release soldiers to, return either to a hospital for treatment and then later return because they were fearful that soldiers wouldn't come back. So eventually, the doctor got me out of there, and they shipped me out to the southern part of Iraq, supposedly to get an MRI and find out what was going on. But it was too early in the campaign, and none of the equipment had arrived in Iraq at that time, so they decided to ship me out to Kuwait, where I could get this MRI. Well, we get to Kuwait, and they don't have the equipment. So they then shipped me to Landstuhl, Germany. So about this time, it's late June. I get to Landstuhl, and I get examined, and they said my injuries are too severe. They don't know what's going on. My recovery time is too long. So they shipped me to Walter Reed. I get to Walter Reed, and I see a neurologist, and they take an MRI. And the neurologist tells me that I just have some nerve damage and a little Botox, and I'll be fine. I can go back to Iraq. So I said, okay, all right, if that's what it is, give me some Botox and send me on my way. They inject the Botox. I return the next day. There's no differences. I'm still in pain. I keep complaining, and they send me to an orthopedic surgeon. Now, he takes the same MRI, and he reads it, and he determines now that I have herniated discs and nerve damage. So he gives me three choices. One, I could leave it alone, hope for the best. He could give me some steroids, and that's 50-50 chance. Or he could operate, and I would be all right. Well, I chose the operation. He operated. They put a plate in my neck, my back, and but that didn't take away all the pain. While I was recuperating at Walter Reed, our medic came back to Walter Reed, and he told us that as the unit was being relieved by the Dutch Marines to move further north up to Baghdad, they came in and did an inspection of the area, an analysis, and did some testing because they were going to live in the area that we were living in, an abandoned railroad repair yard in Al Samoa. To our surprise, the Dutch Marines said that the area was highly contaminated with depleted uranium and that we shouldn't be living there. Well, we had been living there for about 2.5 months at this time, living, sleeping, eating. The Dutch Marines refused to move into the compound, and they moved about 5 or 10 miles out into the desert where they built their own compound from scratch. With this information, there were about 7 of us now at Walter Reed who had been medevaced out for various reasons: headaches, fatigue, joint pains, blood in the urine, blood in stool. We took this information to the doctors at Walter Reed, and we told them what the Dutch Marines had said, how the area we were living in was contaminated with depleted uranium, and asked them if any of the symptoms that we were having contributed to depleted uranium. Of course, they said no. There was no such thing as depleted uranium. It was all in our heads, and we had nothing to worry about. We continued to press the issue. We reached out to Juan Gonzalez of the Daily News. We were getting nowhere with the military. And after being in during Vietnam and seeing how the soldiers in Vietnam were treated when Agent Orange was brought to light, we wanted some questions answered. Juan Gonzalez came in, and he knew a little about depleted uranium. And he got back with his director of operations there, and they decided that they were going to pay for our testing, because all along the military had told us there was no test for depleted uranium. You know, they would treat us, and you know, if we got better, fine. If not, they would medically retire us. Dr. Thomas Fazey, Dr. Lawrence were hired by the Daily News to collect the samples, and they were sent off to Germany for analysis. Late April, May, the samples came back positive for exposure to depleted uranium. There were about 9 of us from my unit at that time. We took this information back to the military, and it was at this time they told us they would test us. Well, we asked them, you know, why didn't you test us before? You said there was no test. Now all of a sudden there's a test for depleted uranium. So seeing how they had been lying to us all along, we decided to take the test to see what their results would show. Of course, when their results came back, for all 9 of us, it showed that we weren't positive for exposure to depleted uranium. Later on, while at Walter Reed, we found out that on the 7th floor, there was a SEAL ward. And on this ward, there were soldiers who were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan who had contracted 2 and 3 different types of cancer. And they were being sealed up there. The only people that were allowed up there were their family members. And all these soldiers were complaining of the same ailments that we were complaining of. The only thing is that they had came down with different types of cancer, and most of them succumbed to it. Usually when I speak about this, there's a young man that I like to talk about. His name is Dustin Brim. Dustin Brim was about 20 years old. He graduated high school in Florida, and he started hanging around the wrong element. His mother, single parent, she wanted to make sure he didn't, go the wrong way. So she tried to find him a job. And one day she came along a recruiter station, and she went in, she picked up some brochures, and she came back home, and she convinced her son to join the military. It was kind of hard to find a job out there in Florida, and she wanted to get him away from the guys he was hanging with. He signed the papers and he joined. Young man, 20 years old, perfect health, goes through basic individual training, and next thing you know, he's in Iraq. And within 6 months, he starts complaining about stomach aches, headaches, and there you go again. There's a shortage of soldiers, so he's ignored until one day he passes out, and they have to take him to the medic. And they take him to the doctor, and it's more than what can be done for him right there in Iraq. So he's shipped out to Kuwait, and from Kuwait he ended up at Walter Reed, where I was at the time, on the 7th floor of Walter Reed Army Hospital, with 3 different types of cancer in his body attacking his vital organs. Well, he lasted a little less than a year. So can you imagine how his mother felt? And she was the one that talked him into going into the service, 20 years old. During Vietnam, when the soldiers complained of Agent Orange, and how the parents, the spouses and the children reborn, stillborn. The first Gulf War, when the soldiers came back complaining of blood problems, children being born stillborn, deformed, nothing was done. It was kept a secret. 30 years later, with Agent Orange, now they're starting to compensate the soldiers who have been exposed to it. When we got out, a couple of us, we filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Army. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court just last year, but it wasn't heard, so it died up there. Our attorneys are still working on a way of getting around a little-known doctrine that the military uses to protect themselves from being sued, and it's called the Ferris doctrine. And it goes about 40 years ago, an individual who was in the service named Ferris tried to sue the military for injuries that he sustained while on duty. And it went before a tribunal of 7 judges, and 7 judges voted on it. 3 were in favor of Ferris suing the government, and 4 against. And this has stood for the last 40 years, and this is what the U.S. government has been using to prevent its soldiers from suing them for things like Agent Orange and depleted uranium and other injuries that they sustain while on active duty, where if you were employed by, a local firm and you got injured, you could sue them and receive compensation, but not with the military. And that's my story. I still talk about it. Just yesterday, while I was at my chiropractor's office, I was talking to 2 of the assistants there, and somehow the topic went to the war. And one of the ladies was telling me that her husband had just came back from Afghanistan. So I started telling her about my experience and about depleted uranium and the mass spectrometer method that was used to detect the depleted uranium in our body. I'm still amazed at the number of people that know nothing about depleted uranium, the number of soldiers that have, still serving over there. When we came back, CNN got a hold of a tape, and in this tape, the military made it in I think the late 90s, and it was an informational tape about depleted uranium that was supposed to be disseminated to all the soldiers. Well, we never saw this tape. And this was part of the evidence that we were going to be using in our lawsuit against them. When CNN asked the colonel who was representing the military at this time why we didn't see the tape, he said that there was some misinformation in the tape. And when they were asked what information was wrong, they couldn't tell them. And in the tape, it just basically told the soldiers how to identify targets that had been hit by depleted uranium, and that depleted uranium was harmful if inhaled, and if you entered an area and you found it to be contaminated with depleted uranium, that you should leave the area within 15 minutes and not re-enter. We passed by burning tanks that had been hit with DU rounds all the way through Iraq, breathing in the smoke, living in an area that had been contaminated. Little did we know that from the first Gulf War, when the soldiers went into Iraq to push Saddam Hussein back, depleted uranium rounds were used then, and the government had a map of all the areas that DU rounds had been dropped. So they knew before this war even started what areas were contaminated with DU already. In the first Gulf War, they dropped over 300 tons of depleted uranium rounds. And the United States alone in the second Gulf War tripled that. Now, that's not even considering what the UK dropped. Or was it, it was double. The United States doubled what they did in the first Gulf War. And they still, to this day, deny that DU is harmful. I was told by one doctor at Walter Reed that DU was so safe that you could sprinkle it on your cereal and eat it in the morning. So I asked him if he did it, I'd do it too. But of course he didn't. His name is Dr. Kilpatrick, and he's still in charge of operations there at Walter Reed.